it. And ladies and gentlemen, Hal Chitwood, our chair.
Hey. Hello, hello. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope y'all have been having a good conference so far. Uh, let's not waste any time. We'll get right into it. Like Dr. Johnson said, my name is Kyle Chitwood. I am a second year PhD student at the University of Memphis, and my research areas are kind of centering around race, sound, and spirituality. Um, so I just wanted to introduce myself. Panelists, I'll let y'all introduce yourselves when it comes time to present. So we have two wonderful presentations that we'll be hearing from in this panel. We'll keep things, I think we just have two panelists. We got about an hour 15 hour what? Yeah, hour 15 minutes to work with. Um, so I think we can run with about minutes per presentation and leave the rest of the time for questions. Give y'all a little extra time to work with if need be. And I'll give y'all like a 2-minute warning in case we are running short on time on the presentations. Uh, does that sound good with everyone? All right, cool. Good deal. So we will go ahead and get things started with Mr. Benton. Um, if you'll just kindly introduce yourself and let us know what we'll be hearing today.
All right, 1 second while I share my screen. All right, I think the screen is shared. Am I correct? Yeah, all right, very good. All right, first of all, my name is Darius Benton. I'm an associate professor of communication studies at the University of Houston downtown here in Houston, Texas. I'm also the director of the Masters of Arts in Strategic Communication program here. My emphasis areas tend to be around organizational culture and leadership with particular interest in race, gender, and religion. I'm excited to be on this panel as well today because I get to share it with Reggie, who we went to school together at Candler School of Theology for our MDiv program. So this is exciting to me as well to share this space with him. And I'm grateful to Dr. Johnson and everyone else for being here and for creating this opportunity for us to share. The first author on this particular project was unable to be here today, but he did submit a video as a part of this presentation. And so we'll hear his voice and see his face in a little bit, but he's Dr. LaMont Johnson of Shaw University as well. And so, our topic for today and for this time is a rhetorical analysis of Bishop Mariann Budde's inaugural prayer service sermon. I was very moved by this message, of course, when it started making traction amongst the virtual spaces. I think I was in the gym at the time, and I was like, "Wait, what happened here?" So I had to go, and at first, like everyone else, so like most people, I saw the ending of it. And I was like, oh, wow, the ball's on this lady. I love it. But then had to go back, of course, and listen to the entire sermon. And I was like, initially, like, okay, this is a lot here. This is a lot to unpack. This is something that we have to do some work with, because I realized even in that moment that this probably will be the second sermon of its kind, and the first being the Confusing God and Government sermon by the Reverend Dr. Jeremiah Wright many years ago, to make such an impact on the international stage. And so I'll just kind of jump into just some of the pre-work before we hear Dr. Johnson's speech. But of course, who is Mariann Edgar Budde? Bishop Mariann Edgar Budde. She was consecrated as the ninth bishop of the Washington in November 2011, and served as the interim dean of chapel of the National Cathedral from 2016 to 2017. Beyond that, she's been a Episcopal rector for the Episcopal Church in Minneapolis for 18 years. She also currently serves as the spiritual leader for 88 Episcopal congregations and 10 Episcopal schools in the District of Columbia and 4 Maryland counties. She's also educated with the BA, MDiv, and DMin. So, I definitely think that she has merit even beyond possibly meeting some of our DEI qualifications. The context of this particular message, of course, we know it was earlier this year, a couple of months ago, January, not even a couple of months ago, about 6 weeks ago, on January 21st, 2025. It was in the National Prayer Service, which is held after the presidential inauguration, the day after. It was in the Washington National Cathedral. Present was, of course, the re-inaugurated President Trump, also Vice President Vance, their families, many other dignitaries, politicians, and the world was definitely watching as this particular sermon was given. The words that probably struck most people's attention was when she said this plea to the president. I was tempted to play it today, but for the sake of time, I did not want to. Please go back and watch it. If you haven't watched the whole sermon, I highly encourage you to watch it in its entirety because in my personal opinion, it's a beautiful message that convicted and challenged me as well. But when she said, "Let me make one final plea, Mr. President, millions have put their trust in you. And as you told the nation yesterday, you have felt the providential hand of a loving God. In the name of our God, I ask that you have mercy upon the people of our country who are scared now. They're gay, lesbian, transgender children, and Democratic, Republican, and independent families, some who fear for their lives." And then it goes on from there. There were a lot of news headlines, of course, that were in response to this, that she refused to apologize. There was Trump called for a public apology. That she defended her plea. There were some that talks about do justice, hate mercy. What we know about the bishop who upset Trump. After viral sermon, GOP threatens religious liberties. She might have been out of pocket, but she was right. So it's a lot of different types of responses that we saw in the media, both in support and rejection of this particular prophetic rhetoric. Of course, the returning president's response was that the so-called bishop who spoke at the National Prayer Service on Tuesday morning was a radical left hardline Trump hater. She brought her church into the world of politics in a very ungracious way. She was nasty in tone and not compelling or smart, which we know that could be debatable. All right, so at this time, I'm going to pull in Dr. Johnson's video, Dr. LaMont Johnson's video, and hear his analysis of this message. And I think I have the sound working as well. If the sound doesn't work, please let me know.
A rhetorical analysis of Bishop Mariann Budde's inaugural prayer service sermon. Religious rhetoric plays a crucial role in shaping public consciousness, often serving as a bridge between theological principles and civic life. Bishop Mariann Budde's inaugural prayer service sermon offers a unique case study in how religious leaders engage with contemporary issues, particularly regarding unity, democracy, and social justice. Her sermon draws from scriptural allusions and moral imperatives to craft a message that transcends partisan divisions. This paper explores how Budde's sermon utilizes rhetorical strategies to foster a sense of national unity while advocating for marginalized communities. The role of religious rhetoric in public discourse. Religious rhetoric, particularly in homiletics, serves as both a means of persuasion and a moral compass for the faithful. Hogan, 2019. Bishop Budde's sermon strategically employs scriptural allusions, ethical appeals, and prophetic voice to challenge divisions while calling for national unity. Her invocation of Jesus's teachings on love and mercy, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, underscores a theologically grounded argument for social cohesion beyond political affiliation. Budde's sermon follows a long-standing tradition of religious rhetoric being used to address political and social realities. As Hogan 2019 highlights, religious discourse is not merely confined to worship spaces, but actively informs public policy and moral reflection. By appealing to Christian ethics, Budde presents unity not as a matter of political compromise, but as a fundamental moral obligation. Secondly, prophetic preaching and racial justice. From a racial and cultural perspective, Budde's sermon resonates with the historical tradition of prophetic preaching in Black and marginalized communities, immigrants, LGBTQ individuals, and laborers, aligns with the ethos of inclusive faith-based advocacy, Smith 2021. This commitment to social justice is a defining characteristic of prophetic preaching, which challenges societal norms and calls for transformative action. And this actually is explored more in A Prophetic Patriot, a forthcoming work from Bloomsbury publication by Johnson and another scholar out of the University of Houston, Jonathan Chisholm. Mitchell 2008 describes prophetic preaching as a rhetorical tradition that emerges in response to injustice, calling upon moral authority to inspire change. Budde's sermon, aligns with the tradition as she advocates for the dignity of every individual, regardless of race, nationality, or social status. Her message echoes the theological arguments found in liberation theology, which emphasizes God's preferential concern for the oppressed, or as many know the term, God is on the side of the oppressed. In response to Budde's sermon, social media pundits, political leaders, and even the now newly re-elected president did not critique the style, methodology, or content of her sermon. However, their critique was solely on the sermon as being viewed, read, or heard as a political sermon. However, Justin Gaboni, 2024, stated, "We can't separate what we believe in the political arena from who we are in Christ and what obedience to God demands." Scriptural allusions and ethical persuasion. A key rhetorical strategy in Budde's sermon is her extensive use of scriptural references. By invoking biblical passages, she establishes credibility with a faith-based audience while reinforcing her call for unity. One particularly striking reference is Jesus's call to love one's enemies, and pray for those who persecute them. This passage, central to Christian teaching, provides a moral foundation for Budde's argument that unity is not about political agreement, but about mutual respect and compassion. Furthermore, Budde's ethical appeals rely on the theological concept of Imago Dei, the belief that all humans are created in the image of God. This theological claim undergirds her argument for the inherent dignity of every person, making her plea for unity not merely a political stance, but a moral imperative. In conclusion, Bishop Mariann Budde's inaugural prayer service sermon represents a compelling example of how religious rhetoric can function as both a persuasive tool and a moral force. By employing prophetic voice, scriptural allusions, and ethical persuasion, Bishop Budde constructs a vision of unity that challenges societal divisions while affirming human dignity. Allow me to read that again. By employing prophetic voice, scriptural allusions, and ethical persuasion, Bishop Budde constructs a vision of unity that challenges societal divisions while affirming human dignity. Her sermon contributes to ongoing discussions about the role of faith in public life, particularly in its ability to address racial and cultural disparities. This analysis demonstrates how religious rhetoric continues to shape national discourse, offering both hope and a call to action in the pursuit of justice.
All right. So just as a quick reflection, we know that this message was a call for national unity. She highlighted 3 points, was to honor the inherent dignity of every human, honesty in public and public discourse and private conversation, and then also a focus on humility, understanding that we all make mistakes. All make mistakes. This was a gentle yet corrective message where she spoke truth to power. It was very triggering for many in the media and the incoming administration, but it also was a model of effective prophetic rhetoric, as we saw or heard through some of the conversations yesterday, particularly those ideals contributed by Dr. Johnson. Some ongoing questions that we can reflect on, and there's many more, but these are three that I want to kind of center on, is if Bishop Budde was a heterosexual white male, would the reception of the message have been different? Also, is the prophetic message worth the risk? And I think that's something that in all prophetic messages, we know that there is some level of risk that comes along with that. And then also, how will these words be remembered and reflected on by future generations? And so that is where I will conclude our time for right now. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Benton. Forgive me for the wrong title earlier. Yeah, thank you. And if you could extend our thanks to Dr. Johnson as well. Now we can move on to Dr. Bell's presentation.
Greetings. My name is Reginald Bell Jr. I am currently the Assistant Professor of Strategic Communication and Public Relations at Monmouth College. I'm currently working on turning my dissertation, which I completed at the University of Memphis. I'm working on turning my dissertation into a book, and I'm very, very honored to be a part of this conference. I'm very, very honored to be a part of this conference, this first virtual conference. And I'm grateful for Dr. Andre Johnson, who is I consider him as a big brother and a mentor to me. I stand on his shoulders, so I'm very, very grateful for him. I'm also very grateful for my Candler colleague, Dr. Darius Benton. And I want to just give a shout out to everyone else who has presented at the conference. I have been very enriched by your presentations. Today, I want to speak from the topic, Rhetorical Realism and the Dead End of the Prosperity Gospel. Rhetorical Realism and the Dead End of the Prosperity Gospel. I am focusing on, or rather the question that this work in progress, although I am turning my dissertation into a book, this piece that I am discussing today is a new piece that I have come up with. And by a new piece that I have come up with, what I mean is, in this particular project, I asked this question: what role did apolitical televangelist Joel Osteen, again, what role did apolitical televangelist Joel Osteen play in the decline of one of America's largest social movements, the Black Lives Matter movement of 2020, and subsequently the 2025 DEI federal rollbacks? I'm trying to get an understanding of what role did Joel Osteen play in essentially how we are where we are right now. You know, President Trump has been unleashing what I think it's been referred to as 100 days of chaos. Okay. And it's been trending on social media how Target's stock is down. Why? Because people are protesting. It's DEI rollback. What role did Joel Osteen play a role in how we have arrived at where we are right now? And basically my research finds that Osteen plays in terms of the role that Osteen plays, it is the same role that assimilationist preachers have historically played. Joel Osteen plays the same role that assimilationist preachers have historically played. And by assimilationist preacher, I'm pulling from Ibram X. Kendi's concept of there has always been three types of basically Americans or Europeans. You have racists, assimilationists, and you have anti-racists. Okay? In addition, as it relates to the role that Joel Osteen plays, so not only does he play the role of the typical assimilationist preacher, but comfort is his main stance. In terms of what kind of stand is Joel Osteen making, comfort is his stance. Comfort is his stance. And by comfort, I mean the ability for a person or his adherents to be able to live a comfortable lifestyle, essentially in the absence of or in the presence of or the absence of intense moments. All right. So how did I come to this what I basically just proposed Osteen is doing in terms of the role that he played in the decline of the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement, and in terms of how we arrived at where we are currently in our society. I used the work of three scholars. To get at my answer. One work is a book called Divided by Faith. And basically, Divided by Faith is about the role. Divided by Faith is basically, according to Emerson, the author of the book, the story of how well-intentioned people, their values, and their institutions actually recreate racial divisions and inequities that ostensibly oppose racism. So, in terms of Divided by Faith, the author is basically getting at the role that evangelicals, Joel Osteen is a televangelist, the role that evangelicals who seem to be well-intentioned on the side of justice. Well, Osteen tries to position himself as such, but what role is he actually playing in recreating racial division and inequities for things that they ostensibly oppose? Okay, so Divided by Faith helps me to begin to answer that. The second book that helps me to answer this question is a book by Tisby called The Color of Compromise. It's a book by Tisby called The Color of Compromise. And Tisby's book basically addresses the work of Divided by Faith. He's addressing the work of Divided by Faith. Here's what Tisby has to say about the whole notion of divided by faith and how divided by faith or the way the evangelical church is structured from the vantage of Osteen. Cultures create ways for individuals and groups to organize experiences and evaluate reality. It does so by providing a repertoire or toolkit of ideas, habits, skills, and styles. So whenever someone experiences Joel Osteen, whenever Joel Osteen tells stories, he's basically giving people ideas, habits, and skills. He's in the terms of Edwin Black, the whole notion of second persona. He's giving people cues on how to act. And I'm making the argument that the cues he's giving them, and Tisby's arguing, actually helps to recreate the racism that they're supposedly opposed against. Tisby goes on to say, historically speaking, when faced with the choice between racism and equality, when faced with the choice between racism and equality, the American church has tended to practice a complicit Christianity rather than a courageous Christianity. They choose comfort over constructive conflict, and in so doing, created and maintained a status quo of injustice. All right. So that's Divided by Faith by Emerson, and then The Color of Compromise by Tisby. But then the final work that I'm using is the work of Dana Cloud, primarily her book called Reality Bites. Here's a little backdrop or background on my relationship with Dr. Dana Cloud. So she came out with a book in early 2000, what she called the Rhetoric of Therapy. The Rhetoric of Therapy. And basically what she talks about, she addresses this toolkit that Emerson and Tisby are addressing. The toolkit from which many evangelicals, whether you are a racist evangelical or if you are an assimilationist evangelical, and how are you recreating the very thing that you oppose? Well, one of the ways that Dana Cloud, a communication scholar, gets at that is that she suggests that people like Osteen and politicians, she refers to them as basically they reproduce the status quo. They are cultivators of the status quo. And in America, in the West, it is the status quo to be complicit, well, to either be a racist or to be an assimilationist. And by assimilationist, I'm referring to pretty much the 70% of the silent majority of Americans. Most of the people with whom Osteen is speaking to, it's that silent majority. As you think about the whole notion of races, well, evangelicals and racists, and evangelicals and assimilationists, in terms of races, think, I forgot this guy's name. The founder of Liberty University, the man who founded Liberty University, and the whole notion of the moral right. The work that those men did, or those were pretty much Southern Baptists. That class of people, which many of them are what I would refer to as the managerial class, they could be overt racists, meaning they could isolate or blatantly exclude Black people. Joel Osteen represents that middle group that does not have the luxury to completely isolate or separate from Black people. He's in that assimilationist. He's in that assimilationist group, that 70%, that silent majority, that group that's in the middle that rarely says anything. Yes, Jerry Falwell. Thank you very much, Marcus. Joel Osteen is basically the face of that 70% who doesn't have the luxury of completely isolating. However, he's complicit or he's okay with it. So in terms of Dana Cloud, she talks about how Joel Osteen pulls from the same script, really that both Democrats and Republicans pull from, all right, to continue the perpetuation of racial injustice. He pulls from the same script. Joel Osteen pulls from the same script. Dana Cloud refers to it as a rhetoric of therapy. Well, after she wrote that book, it's called Control and Constellation of Rhetorical Therapy. She wrote a book in 2018 called Reality Bites. And in the book Reality Bites, she provides a way for me to be able to articulate how Joel Osteen, who always says, I'm apolitical. He always says, he maintains his apoliticalness. She provides a way for me to talk about how this person who is so-called apolitical actually contributes to the political and the cultural environment in America and in the Western world. Okay, so Dana Cloud talks about this notion of the big five. He basically says that the evangelical right wing employs the big five strategy, employs five big strategies to essentially maintain the status quo. Okay? To understand the role that Joel Osteen played in the decline of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020, I use Cloud's theory of the big five, okay? One of the theories is the notion, or part of the theory is the notion of affect and emotion. It's this notion of affect and emotion. All right. When you all think of affect and emotion, what I basically want you to think about is under what condition can plain folk or regular folk be fooled? FOOLED. Under what conditions can plain folk or regular folk, or really again, I'm talking about that 70% in the middle who's the majority of the time they're silent. All right. In Dr. Andre Johnson's book that he and that he and Amanda Edgar did on the Black Lives Matter movement, they address the complexity of taking a stand in the face of increasing white supremacist group, police aggression, and a global pandemic. All right. When George Floyd died, that's what was going on in the world. As Dana Cloud tries to help us to understand this whole notion of how the people can possibly be fooled, how the people can possibly be fooled. And by that, I'm also referring to the fact that there are I think it's between 15 to 26 million people showed up in the streets for the Black Lives Matter movement. How do we move from 15 to 26 million people in the streets to demanding DEI to DEI federally being rolled back? Well, Dana Cloud introduces the notion of states of intensity, states of intensity. And by states of intensity, he's basically referring to the raw emotions or the raw state of that 70% of people as they're trying to make a decision on what to do next. So, and I'm pretty sure everybody on here can recall that raw state that you were in May 2020, after George Floyd was killed, when people were in the street protesting. One of the things that I've noticed as I'm thinking about this intensity, this state of intensities, one of the things that I've noticed that I really want to sort of hone in on, Joel Osteen talks about how he's a prosperity gospel preacher. He's all about health, wealth, and relationship. That's what he means by prosperity gospel preacher. Technically, when in May 2020 and June 2020, the summer of protests, mostly everybody was concerned about those three things: health, wealth, and relationship. Health, wealth, and relationships. Here's what I mean by that. So if I were to look at it from how Dr. Andre Johnson and Omega ever addresses that summer, they're concerned about the complexity of taking a stand in the face of increasing white supremacist groups, police aggression, and the global pandemic. The global pandemic had to do with health. Police aggression, I equate that to wealth. Police aggression has to do with wealth. Think about it. When we go, when you're walking in the grocery store, nobody's gonna steal. We're all gonna obey the prices because of the police. All right. And then in terms of relationship, the white supremacist group threaten relationships. All right. Joel Osteen realized that moment was going on too when he entered the picture. So Joel Osteen realized, oh, here's another moment of health where health, wealth, and relationship is in jeopardy. By health, he understood COVID was going on. By wealth, think about the prices. All of the prices had gone up around that period. By relationship, George Floyd was literally lynched. All right. So in terms of states of intensities, everybody was in that moment. People were in the street. They wanted to do something. But then you have to go back to what Tisby says, which is that most people are going to choose comfort. And by choosing comfort, you become complicit. Joel Osteen enters the picture during this affect and effect moment where everybody's dealing with health, wealth, and relationship. He enters the picture. When he enters the picture, he models embodiment, which is one of the five, where he goes to the protest. Osteen goes to the protest first. Well, yeah. Then he goes from the protest to doing, he has a spectacle. This is another one of the big five. He has a spectacle, which is a conversation between him and John Gray. He has a spectacle. At this spectacle, the way that Joel Osteen engages the topic, really at the spectacle, at the Black Lives Matter movement, and he tweeted 6 times about George Floyd, and his tweets, his conversation with John Gray, and his Black Lives Matter movement. In all 3 of those different scenarios, which is everything that he did as it related to that moment, you see Joel Osteen helping that 70% go back to their comfort, go back to being complicit. One of the ways another way he does that, big five, affect, emotion, he understands the state of intensity. He understands how to use spectacle, and he's a celebrity. But here's also something else that he did. Another one of the big five is the notion of myth. Understand me when I say this, you all. Everything that Joel Osteen said in his tweets, the 6 tweets, everything he said in the interview at the Black Lives Matter movement, and everything he said in about a 55-minute conversation, whatever that means, so-called conversation with John Gray, everything that Joel Osteen said falls into one of 4 myths. He seems to be saying different things, but throughout the whole thing, Joel Osteen only said one of 4 myths. Here's what the myths are. The myth of color blindness, the myth of upward mobility, the myth of separation of church and state, and the myth of the white savior. Everything that Joel Osteen does during this crucial moment in history, as he's trying to have an impact on that 70%, everything he says falls into one of these 4 myths, okay? It is because Osteen successfully does what he does that helps us to understand how one of the ways that the Black Lives Matter movement lost some of its momentum, okay? So what are the implications of this? Well, one of the implications of this, Jenkins, Ito, and Boyd talk about this notion of participatory culture and the fact that more and more organizations, institutions, and businesses have embraced a rhetoric of participation, yet it is abundantly clear that not all forms of participation are equally meaningful and empowering. Whereas many organizations were trying to bolster, infuse more into the Black Lives Matter movement, what Joel Osteen did was actually taking away from it, diluting it, causing it to decline. Another implication is that activists, professors, anyone who's not interested in being a cultivator of the status quo, you should exercise what is called the fidelity standard. The fidelity standard, 2 minutes remaining. Yep. Okay, the fidelity standard. By fidelity standard, this comes from Dana Cloud's notion of how the big five work, one of the things that we need to do with our students or our congregants or people who are engaged in protest work is to help them to understand the fidelity standard test, meaning in light of what's coming out of a person's mouth, and in light of what's coming out of a person's mouth, does what that person say or what that person tweet, is that in the interest? Ultimately, will it serve the interest of me, a plain folk, an oppressed person, or will it serve corporate interests? And finally, I want to close with something that I saw that J. Cameron Carter, who's a homiletician, he posted this on social media today. He said, "Let us be clear, whiteness is not a race, it is a story." Joel Osteen is always telling a story, and he employs the big five to tell his story. And what I'm showing here is that the story he tells actually played a significant role in the decline of the Black Lives Matter movement of 2020 and subsequently the DEI rollback that we've seen in the first 100 days of chaos with President Trump. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Benton, Dr. Bell, thank you all so much for sharing your works with us. I want to open up the floor for the last 30 minutes or so of this panel. Open up the floor for any questions that the audience may have. Y'all can feel free to use the hand raise feature, or I'm not opposed to having questions being dropped into the chat if y'all want to go that route. And if no one has, I can start off with some questions if that's all right, if y'all will let me. Benton, I wanted to ask you something that kind of was interesting, that I thought was interesting was toward the beginning you said that Bishop Budde was kind of enacting like the African American prophetic tradition. Was that right?
I don't know if I use those words.
Okay.
But what I said, I think initially was that as far as the public reaction or public response, particularly that of the media, it was similar to that of the response to the reemergence of the Confusing God and Government sermon by Jeremiah Wright that happened during the Obama election cycle. And so, there was a lot of outrage in response to the reemergence of that sermon, which was given many years prior to the actual election cycle of President Obama. And so this was when I heard this sermon, I kind of could anticipate or feel that it would have a similar reaction in the public spaces, particularly in media reactions when we get to the idea of sound bites and, taking one little small piece of a larger picture to use it for manipulation or use it for political purposes or even clicks or engagement online or just for a news cycle. And so I knew that it would probably birth a similar response, which it did. And that's why I brought in some of those headlines that came up, which were that was just a few of a whole lot of that particular news cycle. And so while I'm not saying that those messages were identical in their messages themselves, they both align in that prophetic rhetoric tradition, but very different circumstances, but definitely similar responses, and possible outcomes, I guess you would say.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, thank you.
If I can just jump in here a little bit, and just to say, since we're talking about prophetic rhetoric is also, and the reason why I think, Darius, you saw the similarities or some similarities is because in order to be a piece of prophetic rhetoric in the way that we have studied it, now there may be some new dynamics and people are working on that, and that's fine. But if we're talking about the traditional 8th century prophet Hebrew prophets, and then how we understand prophetic rhetoric today, location matters, meaning who are you being prophetic with, against, for, whatever word you want to use. If Bishop Budde would have, for instance, been prophetic and denouncing refugees or immigrants, or being prophetic saying that we need to lock up everybody that's illegal and all that, like I'm speaking truth to power and stuff, we will question that, because the location, being on the side of the marginal, all of that is not part of it. And the reason why is that with certain groups of people, or certain things that you attack, or you chastise, or you criticize, or you try to make better, that's what brings out all of the vitriol and things of that nature. So I'm always asking the question when somebody, if they looking at the prophetic rhetorical model, and I'm always saying, yeah, but location does matter as well too, and about where the prophet centers themselves in this message.
Absolutely. And I think
Mhm.
and I think Lamont Johnson's message, when he talked about it, he did
Mhm.
reflect on Black liberation theology and some of
Right.
those ideals, which lines up in that, in being on the side of the oppressed and speaking out against those kind of things. And one thing, when I watched the message in its entirety, I recognized that it convicted me too, but I'm used to that in church, right? Because
Right.
so it didn't, I wasn't offended by it, because I'm used to having those encounters and those moments where I listen to a message and I self-check and self-align and say, okay, you know what? It's spaces in here where I too can grow and
Yep.
learn and change how I move forward. And I think, to me, that is what we would call in some spaces good preaching.
Yep.
When I was coming up, they would say, if you can't say amen, say ouch.
Ouch.
And, some people, that ouch hit a little harder because they weren't used to experiencing that particular ouch. And it was looked at as a political weapon more so than a self-corrective tool, or an opportunity for us to really, as her message, the overlying message was about coming together regardless of our differences. Some people miss that and getting caught up in some of the more triggering languages, or the isolation of the president, and some of the direct alignments with ways that policy can be presented differently, to better secure and better lead the country in that particular moment.
All right.
Any other questions? Some more questions for our panelists here. Dr. Bell, I do have a question for you as well.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So my question was on this kind of, I guess, this difference between, mentioned there's like the three types of people: the racist, assimilationist, anti-racist, right? And you were kind of making, how I understood, if I'm understanding this right, like you're making the argument that Olstein was kind of pulling from this assimilationist script that's contributing to these DEI rollbacks. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And
Yes.
so my question is, like, are you viewing, I mean, it's kind of there, like, are you viewing these DEI rollbacks as assimilationist tactics, or how can they be viewed as more racist tactics, or like where's the kind of tension between those two? Are these like kind of being masked as assimilationist, but on the underside more kind of overtly racist, or like what are your thoughts on that?
I see it more so. See, okay. So I talked about the toolkit. So Emerson and Divided by Faith talks about the whole notion of evangelicals having a toolkit. One of the arguments that Ibram X. Kendi makes in terms of, how to deal with a racist, assimilationist, and an anti-racist, Ibram X. Kendi makes the argument that people must be an anti-racist. Everybody needs to be an anti-racist. Now, assimilationists are not people who identify as anti-racist. So technically 2/3 of the people, so you got racists, assimilationists, anti-racist. 2/3 of the group are actually working together because they're not a part of the overt solution, which Ibram X. Kendi is saying you must be an anti-racist. Joel Osteen does not identify as an anti-racist. Joel Osteen says, I'm not political. So he gets to hold that middle line. Now, one of the things that I've been thinking about as it relates to the fact that Joel Osteen continues to say he's not political. Joel Osteen has Democrats and Republicans at his church. So we always have that tug of war going on between both groups, and yet here we are. So I'm making the argument that what the assimilationists do, which is the silent majority in America, they allow the racists to continue to maintain their power. Now, if we can get that assimilationist group who are not racist, Osteen said several times, I'm colorblind. Well, Osteen is using that ever since around the 60s. Overt racism became covert, and one of the ways it became covert is through the use of people like Osteen saying, I'm colorblind. But in actuality, it's serving the purpose of the racists.
I see. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Audience, I saw some praise in the chat. Is there any constructive things, anything you want to offer to the panelists this afternoon?
I'd like to make a comment to Chadley Richardson. Chadley Richardson noted that one of the reasons younger people have chosen alternative and independent media, sir, that's according to William Barber, sir, that's who his research talks about how they're also, turning away from the church. Turning away from the church, and the fact that the Gen Zers mistrust all institutions. And the reason they mistrust all institutions, including the media, is because they recognize how these organizations basically serve a capitalistic agenda. So that's why they're stepping away from traditional forms of media. That's why they're stepping away from the church. That's why they're protesting most institutions. So I'm saying I agree with your assessment, Richardson.
I saw the little hand raise as well. Was there something you wanted to add as well?
Not only to that, it was an awesome panel. But just to add to that, when I think about Joel Osteen, a black pastor who's getting a lot of traction and a lot of conversation around him is Dr. J.H. Jackson, and how many people who have pulpits, who have opportunity to share in a different fashion, different way, but they take on the same spirit of a Joel Osteen or Jimmy Swaggart or Billy Graham by utilizing their theologies to pretty much to do as what Dr. J.H. Jackson has done.
Thank you. That was a statement. I want to pose something to the floor, something I'm thinking through, and I'm sure Dr. Johnson I'm sure Dr. Johnson can jump in on this. When I read my colleague Benton's abstract about how Bishop Budde resonates, what she did resonates with the prophetic tradition. That's the word that was used in their abstract. It resonates. One of the things that I'm trying to ponder, group, is so as it relates to Joel Osteen. So Joel Osteen was, hold up. So I'm talking about this notion of prophet and speaking truth to power. Joel Osteen, and I'm also still addressing this whole notion of Generation Z and why they're moving the way that they're moving. So Joel Osteen was at a restaurant in California in 20. This was after COVID. This was after COVID. And while he was in that restaurant, one of the servers saw Joel Osteen, and he saw that people were lining up to take pictures with him because Joel Osteen is a celebrity. Well, this young white man, because he sees people taking a picture and because he feels that he has to maximize on the moment, like, I will never have this moment again, he decides to pull out his cell phone. He walks over to where Osteen is, holds the phone up, acts as if he's about to take a picture with Osteen. But as he and Osteen looks at each other, he looks at Osteen and says, "You know, you're a piece of shit." Joel Osteen laughs and walks away. I watched the interview with this young man whom I would like to, whom I've been pondering, referring to him as a prophet. Here's why I want to refer to him as a prophet, because when you listen to how he talks about the fact that I saw Joel Osteen in person, I knew I would never get this opportunity again. I just had to say something now. That sounds like the prophet Jeremiah, who said it's just like fire. Shut up in my bone. He says something. Because this white kid says something, he gets fired from his job. The consequences of being fired. I mean, the consequences of being a prophet. This white kid gets fired from his job. But what he does next to me really demonstrates it's like, dude, you really are a prophet. What he does next, there's a GoFundMe page set up for the guy because, people are like, dude, you did it. But traditional church people are standing up saying, but you used profanity. You disrupted the public space with profanity. You aren't supposed to do that. So there's this divide between the sacred and the profane, where the church is saying the profane is the use of the profanity. But then Gen Zers, who I'm seeing as prophets, are saying, no, the problem ain't the fact that I said you a piece of shit. It's what this man doing with the money. They started a GoFundMe for this young man. And after they start this GoFundMe for this young man, he does not accept the money. He said, I saved enough money being a waiter to where I'm not just out. He said, I want the money that you all raised. I want to give it to a homeless, a houseless, because I don't think you don't supposed to say homeless, unhoused. He said, I want to give his money to the unhoused in my city, wherever he lived in California. So he gave it to a nonprofit in California. Then he turned around and gave it. He said he asked that the other money go to a nonprofit in Houston, Texas. So he cusses Joel Osteen out. Then he shows people how to really be the church. Jesus said, when I was naked, you came and saw after me. So I'm wondering how to talk about what that white guy did in the frame of him being a prophet. and being celebrated by the masses of young people who are like, dude, wherever you go for the rest of your life, we will buy your beer. Jesus cursed the fig tree.
Sounds like got a second project here to work on. Got like a little second presentation here. No, that sounds like a really interesting thing. Dr. Johnson, did you have anything to add on there?
Oh no, I mean, I think he articulated it well. Phrase I would use is just for the technical and doing the technical criticism, rhetorical criticism, people can adopt a prophetic persona and act as a prophet, um, uh, and then go out and do certain things, because who is a prophet for some people may not be prophet for another group of people. So one of the things that I try to do is just talk about a prophetic persona, but no, I think that was explained quite nicely, that uh, the prophet or the person adopting the prophetic persona is not concerned about the rhetorical situation, not concerned about decorum, not concerned about reasoned appeals to try to get on your side. The prophet bears witness, and that's totally different. They bear witness to the atrocities that's going on, and they leave it up to us to sit with that, to do what we will with it. And like Darius said earlier, sometimes you get convicted. Other times you close up your ears and you keep on doing what you've been doing, because it doesn't align to what you believe in. What's happening with a bunch of people that claim to be Christian within the Christian context is that now even the Jesus sayings, like feeding hungry people, visiting sick folk, visiting prison folk, healing the sick, those are now considered liberal or progressive, politically unattainable. And you can say all day long, but this is Jesus. It's read in your Bible. Look, well, I don't, Jesus never said it. People really even don't know their own faith traditions. So typically and usually this is when prophets are called upon to remind us what we need to be reminded of. What do we say we believe in? What are our ideals? And the prophets come, and those who adopt prophetic personas come to remind us, bringing us back. And then sometimes we're so far gone that there's no going back. So you just stand there being the voice crying out in the wilderness sometimes, and just bearing witness. And that 50 years from now, they may even recognize you and build monuments for you, give you a plaque, and say that you were right all along. And then your children and grandchildren will want to know, why on earth did y'all not listen to this person? And that's just the circle. That's how it goes. I tell you what, Kyle, if there's no more questions, I'm looking in the chat. It's just a lot of shout outs. And if we don't have any more questions or comments, we can end here and get prepared, take a break and get prepared for the 3 o'clock panel. The rhetoric, going to be some rhetoric of harmonizing and voices, exploring rhetorical acts through various musical situations. The rhetoric of music is coming up. So we're looking forward to that at 3 o'clock. Can we Yeah, go eat a snack and get ready for some unchristian-like words. Natanya has given us fair warning as the chair of this next panel coming up. So let's all be ready for that. Y'all show some love again to the panelists. Thank you, Kyle, for chairing at the last minute. And thank y'all for coming, and hope y'all stick around for 3 o'clock. Let's take a break and we'll be back at 3.